suggest a retreat, I've been trying to reflect a bit on what I think the big question for a board is, how do we see faith and light in 10 years' time? What are the signs of life and what are the signs of death? I was speaking just the other day with the Superior General of the Little Sisters of Jesus. And it touched me because she said that what we're doing now is just closing lots of fraternities because there are no vocations. And so we're obliged to look with Jesus. What is the meaning of that? What is the meaning today of seeing the little sisters of Jesus, which for a period was a great hope for the church? And when you read the life of little sister Madeleine, the life that was there, she was founding in Iran, in Moscow, in Algeria, over those years. And all the young women and young men, little brothers, were going, that was where everybody was going. And here we are, 60, whatever it is, years later, there were vacations. And, so the fraternities are being closed everywhere. New ones are being born a little bit. I asked her, where are the places of life? She said, Africa. And I said, well, the young women who are entering the communities in Africa, are they staying? That's the question, not having people coming, but are they staying? And she said, in Africa, yes. And I said, well, what is the situation in Asia? They have a lot of communities in Vietnam, that is the thing. So I think what today, this beginning is, how do we see faith and light in 10 years' time? What are the signs of growth, of life, of things that are moving, and what are the signs of death? And it's quite obvious that we have moved from 1971 to 2014. How many years is that? It's 43 years. And the world has changed in 43 years. I remember when Faith and Light began, there were so many people in France, because people with disabilities had no places in the pilgrimages, the Haitian pilgrimage. So there was a sort of wave of people who came. And at that first retreat, just to announce that there'd be a pilgrimage for people with disabilities and their parents, very quickly there were 7,000 people. I mean, there was a wave of enthusiasm. And then in some countries, there were the waves of enthusiasm. In fact, there was a wave of enthusiasm in Poland at a period when only if you were living with people with disabilities could you live in community in front of the communism. So suddenly, in Poland, it moved up. And so the question today is we will begin in the first period, is where are the signs, if you want to call it death, I mean realistically, let's see, where it's not going well, and why. Because this will help us see what the role of the board is to make faith and light something beautiful in the next 5-10 years. And then the second question, which we'll come back to after we looked at the first question, the second question is, where are the beautiful things today? What are the signs of beauty, the signs of movement, the signs of where we see people coming forward, announcing it, and faith and light growing. Where are those places? Not just the places that are holding on. And then the third time will be what suggestions can one have for the future. Does that make sense? So it'll be in 3 parts. The first part will be looking at our world 2014 after the excitement of 71. What are the signs of reducing, what are the problems of the world, what has changed in our world? And then the second part will be where the signs of life, where there's excitement, where there's movement, where there's growth. And so, as I say, the third time will be, as a board, what are the things that can be done? What are the most essential things to conserve the charism of the Does that sound okay, Maria? So, the world has changed. Young people have changed. I mean, we see this here, the young people who are coming here. The high majority of the young people coming to L'Arche in France, non-Christians, wanting to be with people with disabilities, but very rarely people of faith. And many of them are coming to L'Arche, not because L'Arche is a Christian community, but because they themselves have been hurt. They come from families that are disunited. They come from situations of failure. They were hoping to enter into medical school and they failed the exams. I mean, and so many young people today in a situation of failure. And yet, on the other hand, there are movements in the church that are moving along, but they're very structured. At least the ones that we see in France are quite structured. They're meeting regularly once a week or twice a week, and all that reality of. So young people in 1970, some of you might have forgotten, 1970 were the days of community. We want community. And this followed, you know, in the States it was the hippie movement, and it was a time when everybody wanted to get together. Even in New Zealand, down south, it was to get together, be together, and we're going to do beautiful things. It was a time of great utopia. We're going to live with a few goats and we go up in the mountains and we'll be happy forever after. Then was the disillusion of community. It was a huge disillusionment of community. Because community was something seen as beautiful and it's easy to do. Then people discovered that community is not that easy. Living in families is not that easy. I mean, today, when you hear of all the divorces, and to live together is never easy. So there's been a huge movement. People with disabilities. There has been a huge change in the vision of disabilities. Today, I think, in Russia, they're starting the what do you call it?
Paralympics.
The Paralympics, you know. I mean, these were unheard of in the 71s. 71s, people with disabilities, these poor little people that need looking after. In the churches, not too open to receiving them. There were a few people who were prophetic, like the Père Buissonnier. You know, there were prophetic voices, but on the whole in the church, and you know, can communion be given to people who don't understand? I mean, it was a different period. But today, what is the situation is people living alone, going into apartments, and in a lot of the countries, like in New Zealand, they're all living alone in apartments, and so we're in something which is different. And today, people with disabilities in all our countries, they've got so many things going on for them, like bowling or whatever it is. All the various movements for people with disabilities, the groups of people with disabilities. I mean, so this is something new. I mean, there's and we're also in a world where there's less faith, less belief, less belief in Jesus. So as I say, the vision of people with disabilities has changed, but changed in a way that is a bit perplexing. On one side, there are more and more things going on for people with disabilities, more and more people with disabilities living in a home, group homes, or living in apartments. But in many of the countries, there is more and more exasperation in front of people with disabilities. So abortion is taking, and in many countries, I mean, I had a phone call the other day from a young woman, and she's just discovered at the third ecography that her child has a severe disability. And just to listen to her, her immense pain and the question, I mean, and it's not just her, it's not just her and the child, but it's also the grandparents. You know, it's the birth of a child in even a very Catholic family creates all sorts of waves. The parents, the grandparents, so on one side there are lots of things being done, but on the other side a fear. And in a lot of the things being done, there's not very much a fundamental question, which could be, what could people with disabilities do for us? What can they teach us? I mean, this is not a question that is being asked very often. Can they do something? Can they bring a message to the church? Have they got something to say to church? So, if things have progressed on one side with people with disabilities, but in a way that is not necessarily favorable to faith and life, it's about more dances, more games, more this, more sports, more this. But there are certain movements, and I think in a lot of the countries there have been movements like Sparks. Is it Sparks that was started in Chicago with Sister Harrington? Spread. I mean, and Spread has grown in some ways. So it's interesting to see why Spread has grown. Sister Harrington. You know, I don't quite know where they're at now, but there are other movements in France, like Les Bras Ouverts. And Les Bras Ouverts are groups of people, young people, aged, what it could be, say, from 20 to about 35. And in France, they create little groups and take people with disabilities for weekends. And this is spread quite a bit throughout France. How many communities there are in France, but quite a lot. And of course, it's just run by young people themselves and not parents. Parents are happy to give their children or young people to these groups because then the parents have a weekend off. But it's interesting to see that this is something moving. So, the vision of people with disabilities from 1971 to today, there's been a shift. A shift because abortion has become recognized as almost an evidence for many young people. It's an evidence. So on one side, there's the sense we must get rid of them, on one side. And then on the other side, particularly those who are capable are being encouraged. I mean, you remember the film, was it called The Eighth Day? Yeah. And in one way it was a very good film, but in another, people said, well, you see, Down syndrome, they can do beautiful things. Yeah, they can, but think of all the Down syndrome who won't be actors. So there's a movement of encouraging those who are more capable, more doing this and so on, and all those who are less capable. Parents. What I hear in France is everywhere, parents are getting older. It's evident. And many of them cannot now come to meetings because they're getting too old. Their sons and daughters are in institutions or in apartments or in group homes. So the situation is shifting slightly. So the parents are, and then as we can reflect a bit of the various countries, where are those places of movement? I mean, I remember the Philippines at one time seemed to be a huge area of movement. Have they moved to more than 5 communities? I don't know. And this is over 30 years. I mean, it was a great moment with the Philippines. I remember the retreats and, you know. So, what are the communities that are just holding on? And what are the communities that are deepening? So, the first period which we'll be together is a reflection from this 1971 to 2014. And as I was listening to the Little Sisters of Jesus, what she was saying is, we have to see reality en face. Let's look at reality. Let's look at the pain of reality. After, we will look at the joys of reality. But the pain of reality, of a movement. And this is the same pain. I mean, in a diocese like we're in here, if they make a provision of the next 10 years, how many priests will be there? I mean, it's a situation of huge movement. I mean, what was evident, and now, you know, seminaries are less. And this is, so where are the places of movement? And where are the places, and what is being said? It's not to weep. That isn't the thing. It's not to be sad. It's to take what is Jesus saying to us today, the board of directors. What is Jesus saying? And I think this is what we have to look at. What is being said? What is the beautiful things that are coming up, and what are the painful. And as I say, it is not things that we're weeping about. It's to become conscious. You see, the life of Jesus, it's very moving, the life of Jesus. Because the first period of the life of Jesus, Jesus was doing miracles. It was super. Everybody was running after him. Maybe he's the Messiah. You know, he changed water into wine. He did the multiplication of the bread. He resurrected Lazarus. And on the Sunday before the Passion, you know, everybody in Jerusalem, believe it or not, in Jerusalem at that period, there could be 2 million people. Jesus comes from Bethany to Jerusalem, and it talks of a huge crowd of people. Could it be as many as 2 million? I don't know, but they say that during the Passovers in Jerusalem at that time, there could be as many as 2 million. People would come from the diasporas, they would come, 2 million, and they were all there with palms and singing, Hosanna, Hosanna, King of Israel. And you could see the apostles. They're going to be the ones in the new government. You know? I mean, this, you know, Jesus is their man. And they have been chosen by him, and they're going to be in this new government. And so the excitement is immense. He's the Messiah, and he's proved it by his power. And then the shock on the Thursday, when Jesus kneels down and washes their feet. It's not possible. There's something wrong. And so you see the reaction of Peter. You wash my feet? You can't understand now, you know. No, you shall never wash my feet. There's no question. Because he was expecting, they were expecting that Jesus would do some big event. And suddenly something would happen. Hopefully the Romans would all leave, the Sanhedrin and all this would. But the turning point for the disciples was the washing of the feet. The realization that Jesus wasn't this extraordinary person who was going to change everything, and the world would be changed. And so the disciples are, I use the word flattened, but not possible. And Peter saying, you shall never do this. You see, it's something about bigness and littleness. And a lot of the communities that began in 1970 in France have moved from a hope of bigness to a lot of littleness. I mean, you can take a number of communities, some have disappeared, the Beatitudes are in difficulty. I go on the chemin, the Plan de Vie has collapsed. I mean, these were all movements which had the sense that we would be the church, and we would bring something new to the church. So there's a whole movement about the discovery of who is Jesus. And I think with Francis, he's telling us something. The Pope Francis is telling us something. It's not about big things and doing big things, but he's saying go to the peripheries, the periphery, the peripheries, and go there. So there's a change. On one side, you see this movement from success to littleness, and there are some countries where you see a lot of growth. Like in India, you see the Jesuits are growing. But it's even interesting in a place like India, the relationship between a whole movement amongst the Jesuits, which is about development, and another movement, which is very small, about just living with the poor. It's strange. There's a whole sort of vision, we must change the world, and another vision which is to be close to the poor. And that the poor maybe can teach us something. There's a whole sort of... But you see in India, Father Serac, who is the uncle of Odile, is the man who is just living with the poor. And you see now the tension with the Jesuits on one side, it's that maybe there should be no more poor. I push that to an extreme, but you see the tension about development and about living with. So, what I'm trying to say there is to follow Jesus in his littleness, in his humility and his weakness. One of the big moments of tension in the Gospel of John, and it's a very moving tension. You find it in the 6th chapter of St. John. There's a multitude of people following Jesus. And there's the multiplication of the bread. And so this multitude are amazed. And so they want to make Jesus king. And actually the words, they wanted to seize him, to take him by force, make him king, and he would rule over. The next day, Jesus is in Capernaum, and the people who were there during the multiplication of the bread come. And they ask Jesus, how did you get here? I won't go into all the details. And Jesus says, you're coming to see me because you filled up your stomachs. Because they were amazed by the miracle. And Jesus is saying, that isn't what's important. It's not the miracle that's important. What you must look at is the one who God has sent, and listen to him. So it's not the big things that Jesus has done. And then Jesus is going to lead into something which surprises everybody. And he talks about his body and his blood. He who eats my body, drinks my blood, will live in me and I'll live in him. It's something very little. And when the people hear that, they say, well, these words are too hard. And they all start leaving. And Jesus is there, having revealed a secret about littleness. They don't want to hear it, because they want bigness. They want a Jesus who wins, and not a Jesus who appears weak. So, and then I believe the disciples who were there were probably saying, my God, why is he talking about this body and blood? What's all that about? And Jesus looks at them, because their faces must be confused, because everybody starts leaving. And everybody was going to start following him, now they're all leaving. So Jesus looks at them and says, are you going to leave me also?
aussi, vous allez me quitter.
You're going to leave me also.
Est-ce que vous allez me quitter, vous aussi?
He must have seen, the consternation in the faces.
Tu vois lire sur cette consternation.
And then, of course, there's a beautiful Peter, to whom shall we go?
Pierre qui dit,
To whom shall we? You have the words of eternal life.
Tu as les paroles de la vie éternelle.
But it says something about bigness and littleness.
Cela nous parle de la grandeur.
And what is Jesus saying
Que nous dit Jésus?
to faith and light?
Qu'est-ce que dit
What is Jesus saying to the little sisters of Jesus?
Jésus dit?
What is Jesus saying to a diocese like here, where the number of priests is going down, 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 and the only ordinations is 1 or 2 a year? This is in no way repaid. So what is Jesus saying? And it's not just that we must need more priests. I don't think it's that. Quickly, quickly, we must get more priests. No, what is Jesus saying about church? And those who are there, who are believers, what is their role today? So, I'm going to suggest that the first period, and I'll be sending you all off to pray and to take notes. How do you see faith and light today, and where are the places of the downward path? Where are the places where life doesn't seem to flow? Like the whole situations with parents that are aging. So, the first time I would suggest is to be as perspicacious as possible. Not to idealize anything, but to look at reality. What is the reality? And to look at what this reality. Not in imagining anything, but just what is your reality? I mean, what is your reality in New Zealand or the countries you know? And what is the reality? It's not what could be done, or no, it's today, what is happening in Zimbabwe and Zambia. You remember Zambia? It began so beautifully. What was the name of the coordinator? John. I mean, those places that suddenly sprang up. And Zambia, I don't know where Zambia is today, but let's look at the reality, and only look at the reality during this first period. And this, not to see it as something dismal, but Jesus always meets us through reality. It's reality that's important. It's what exists that's important. It's not what could exist or what might exist, but it's existence. Because God is there in reality. So this will be, and we're not there about what should be happening, what could be happening. It's what is the situation today in various countries. Just as for the little sisters of Jesus, what I found so beautiful is, what is Jesus saying to us today as we get smaller? And in a way, let's admit, at the foot of the cross there weren't many people. And I'm not talking about faith and light is at the cross. I'm just saying, look at reality. Reality as it is, reality not as we would like it to be, but as it is. Where are the signs of hope and the signs of growth? So I would suggest that we have the chapel. There is Mass at 5 o'clock. So, but anyway, what I would suggest is that you take half an hour, each one of you, just to look at reality. What is happening? And then there would be a sharing amongst you. what you are seeing. What you are seeing, not of what is beautiful, but what is painful today. Does that make sense? And then the next period will be where are the beautiful things. Does that sound all right for you? And then a period of sharing, not just of what you have been living. It's not making any ideas about it. It's just what is happening today. What is happening today in the United States or Canada, what is happening in Latin America, things you have seen, touched, or heard. So the first period is what we have seen, touched, and heard, because that is of what appears negative. I say what appears. And then the second period is what we have seen and heard, which is beautiful.